Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another ICBA cast, the podcast of the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, the bane of the NDP.
Are we the bane of the NDP?
I don't know. Who else is there?
I don't know.
I'm Jordan Bateman. I'm VP Communications for ICBA, joined as always by
Chris Gardner, President of ICBA.
All right, Chris, we got lots to talk about today. But let's start with a province that has been safely returned to the hands of the Conservatives.
Free enterprise.
Wild Rose Country.
Yes.
Alberta. So Alberta, Jason Kenney won frankly a landslide election last week. Took 55% of the vote. And he's not backing down from talking tough about dealing with BC's intransigence on the Trans Mountain Pipeline.
Yeah, listen, the election was interesting because it really was about pipelines, energy, taxes, the economy, all wrapped up into one sort of set of issues and themes. Unfortunately, the NDP decided to just focus most of their campaign on attacking Jason Kenney personally and some of the folks running on his team. Yeah. It was a failed strategy, and every commentator on election night, if you watched it, was commenting that Rachel Notley's best speech was the speech she gave at her concession speech.
It's not always the way, though. Al Gore's best speech was his concession speech. John Kerry's best speech was his concession speech.
Well, I think in this case, probably because at that point you've got some humility.
The
voters
off.
have rendered their verdict.
Yeah.
But listen, I think ultimately Albertans, their economy is under significant pressure.
Yes.
And I would say the energy sector is on its knees. It's been under attack in lots of different ways. And I don't think Albertans really trusted Rachel Notley to take them any further down the course of trying to get that economy started again. Jason Kenney is extremely energetic, passionate about energy, passionate about Alberta, and he's got a very strong mandate to move forward.
Yeah, and spoke French in his
He did
in his winning speech, which interesting little detail there.
Well, it's west of Toronto, west of Quebec. That's probably a first.
Yeah.
I can't think of anyone who would have ever done that before. Maybe Manitoba. But listen, I think Jason Kenney is basically saying Canada has an enormously important energy asset in Alberta, oil and gas, and the spin-off investment that flows from that. And it's been landlocked. This is an opportunity for Canada to move forward in a different direction. Unfortunately, you have a government in British Columbia which is blocking it at every turn. And as was pointed out, Quebec, they stood up against Energy East. And following Jason Kenney's elections, what did the Premier of Quebec say? There is no way a pipeline's going to go through Quebec.
Yep, no, exactly. Now, interestingly enough, I think we all understand the pivot that John Horgan's going to make, that he's going to wrap himself in the BC flag and talk about how he's standing up for British Columbia against mean old Jason Kenney in Alberta. But it's not British Columbian to be anti-Canadian. If I'm Andrew Wilkinson or if I'm Jason Kenney, I wrap myself in the Canadian flag and say, what John Horgan is doing is un-Canadian by preventing us from getting our oil and gas to market.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. What Horgan's effectively trying to do is starting to dictate to other provinces, other businesses in Canada, that he's going to determine what goods will flow through the Port of Vancouver and will flow through this province. And this is a federally regulated project. The port is federally regulated. He doesn't get to pick and choose on behalf of the country what goods are exported on behalf of all Canadians through the Port of Vancouver. But that's exactly what he wants to do. It is un-Canadian. And so this dynamic now is going to be very interesting to see how it plays out over the next few months.
Absolutely. Now, Jason Kenney made some hires to his senior staff, and one person who we know quite well, and frankly tried to hire ourselves at different points, Katy Merrifield, who successfully navigated Andrew Wilkinson, led Andrew Wilkinson's campaign to become BC Liberal leader, youngest woman to ever helm a successful leadership campaign in Canadian history. She is now moving to Alberta to head up Kenney's comms shop and policy, just comms. But anyways, great hire by Jason Kenney. Can't say enough about Katy.
Yeah, very, very talented, very hardworking.
Yeah.
She's going to do a great
job.
job.
So smart, yeah.
So unfortunately, she's going to move to Edmonton.
Yes.
And, moving from Vancouver to Edmonton. Cheaper housing.
That's right. Think of the money she's going to save in gasoline and in housing.
That's right. But the weather.
Yes,
Yeah,
and in sales tax. She's going to save all this money.
Anyways, but listen, a great opportunity for her. She's going to do a great job for the newly elected premier, and we look forward to staying in touch with her and seeing how she does in the next 4 years.
Yeah, hopefully she cuts her teeth there, and then perhaps sanity returns to British Columbia as electorate at some point, and we get a free enterprise government. She comes back and maybe helms that. So there you go.
Right.
See, Katy, I'm already making all your future plans for you. Remember us little people when you're out there fighting the good fight for Canadian energy.
That's right.
Speaking of Canadian energy, on Alberta election day, deep into the afternoon, it was announced by the Horgan government after it couldn't hurt Rachel Notley at all, and before Jason Kenney could bluster away and attack him, John Horgan's government endorsed the hated Bill C-69. I want to read you some comments about Bill C-69. This is the what many Western premiers have called the No Pipelines Bill. Rachel Notley opposes this federal legislation that Trudeau wants to bring in, and basically it just grinds environmental assessment to a halt, makes it almost impossible to build any kind of major energy thing. Rachel Notley called it swapping one broken system for another. Jason Kenney says it's a sucker punch to an already reeling economy. Newfoundland's Dwight Ball says it will increase regulatory burdens, costs, and timelines without enhancing environmental outcomes. Scott Moe and Brian Pallister and Doug Ford threatened to walk out of a federal meeting over C-69. Chris, I'm going to tell you the person they sent to defend BC interests on Bill C-69 and say that it's all hunky-dory. Are you ready for this? It's not the Minister of Environment. It was not the Premier.
Minister of Jobs.
No, not Minister of Jobs, not Minister responsible for climate change, not any of those people, not Ministry of Energy, God forbid. Right. It was the, and I got to read this because it's so obscure, the Associate Deputy Minister for the Provincial Environmental Assessment Office. If anyone in British Columbia besides that gentleman and his wife can name that person, congratulations, you're better than I am. Chris, how excited are you to see our province endorse a job-killing piece of legislation like C-69?
Well, we put in a submission to the Senate committee reviewing Bill C-69. We came out very strongly against the legislation. We presented in Ottawa. We presented not a week before last when the committee was in Vancouver. And on a number of fronts, what this bill will mean is that it will make the environmental assessment of major infrastructure projects, often these are energy projects, more complicated, more time-consuming, more difficult to navigate. There is no business organization that supports this legislation. There's the only province that's come out supporting it is the province of British Columbia.
Because they know it'll grind everything to a halt.
So this is again, this speaks to where we are in Canada. We've the CEO of the Royal Bank of Canada came out a few weeks ago and said, over the last 2 years, Canada's lost $100 billion Canadian in investment opportunities, and the talent, the jobs, the opportunity that flows from those investment dollars. We are, in terms of getting a permit for a general construction project, ranked 34 out of 35 OECD countries. In British Columbia, new investment dollars are taxed the highest rate among any of the provinces in the country. So we're becoming known as a jurisdiction where you can't get things done. This makes it worse. It will chase investment dollars away. We're not putting out the welcome mat. And it's another example of Canada shooting itself in the foot.
And what was it the RBC president said? $100 billion in investment Canada's lost out in the past 2 years.
Yeah. It's
and
crazy.
It's because of nonsense like this.
Yeah. It is crazy. So you go our submission. You should read it. It's available on our website, on our Facebook page, on our website.
On our website, sure.
On our website. It's a short read, but it's a good summary of why this piece of legislation should not pass. And we are lockstep with every other major business organization in this country. Yeah, and for an association like ours that represents construction workers, they want to build these pipelines, and their jobs are being frozen out right now. That is that. Speaking of federal, let's cut really quick to something else we've been advocating on. We actually got, we can hardly believe it, a favorable decision from the Canadian International Trade Tribunal, CITT. This is a trade
it oversees trade for Canada and is, kind of deals with different trade disputes. They've come out and said and agreed with us that the government of Canada tariffs on imported steel are wrong-headed and should be stopped. It's actually hurting the BC economy, especially in construction. And they have asked that the Cabinet, Government of Canada, reaffirm their decision before May 13th. I know that we're definitely encouraging the Trudeau Cabinet to do that.
Yeah, we submitted a letter to Minister Morneau making that point. CITT's ruled, and as you said, surprisingly, we've got a favorable ruling on an economic file. But by May 13th, hopefully the government supports that decision, and the duties and tariffs on imported steel and aluminum will be removed, and that will be significant. For those markets, and a lot of the markets in British Columbia where you have affordability challenges with housing, this will help lower the cost of construction.
Yep.
And everything we can do to make construction cheaper, so that for the end purchaser, the first-time home buyer, families who are trying to find a larger home when their family grows, this will provide some relief.
Yeah, and in building SkyTrain lines and building Site C Dam. I mean, you think of all these projects at LNG Canada, all these projects require rebar. Yeah. This all started when Donald Trump slapped a tariff on Canadian steel coming into the States. Yeah. Ottawa, being far away from the Lower Mainland, said to themselves, "Oh, geez, we need to make sure we're supporting the Canadian steel." So they slapped tariffs on all steel coming into the country. The problem with that is there is not enough steel and rebar being built or being created anywhere in Western Canada. Therefore, most of the Lower Mainland's steel is imported from places like Turkey and Asia. They come in here and from America, and that saves us a bunch of money from having to bring this really heavy product by train from Eastern Canada. So, for the Lower Mainland, for our construction market, this would be a huge relief. And we've been working with a number of folks on this for a long time, hoping that we can dig ourselves out of this.
It's a classic example of a made in Central Canada policy that doesn't work for Western Canada. The steel mills in Central Canada, which the tariff was designed to protect, do not supply rebar and steel products to BC and Alberta. And as a result, we get our steel, our rebar, from the United States or markets in Asia. And this tariff made that more expensive, which means ultimately consumers, first-time home buyers, paid the price in a more expensive end product. And taxpayers pay the price, as you mentioned. We're building these big infrastructure projects. They cost more, we pay more. So at the end of the day, Western Canadian taxpayers get hurt at the expense of the federal government protecting industry in Quebec and Ontario.
Yeah, no, exactly. One last federal note, the actually very competitive Kamloops Thompson Caribou riding has been held by a conservative Cathy McLeod since 2008. Well, there's a prominent name in BC politics stepping forward to run for the federal Liberals there. Terry Lake, the veterinarian turned city councillor turned Kamloops mayor turned BC health minister, has announced that he will seek the nomination to run with the Trudeau Liberals in Kamloops Thompson Caribou. This was a riding, Chris, that 5 years ago was very safe conservative territory. Right. In 2011, Cathy McLeod beat the new Democratic candidate 52% to 37%. The Liberal wasn't even on the radar, 5% of the vote. But in 2015, the Trudeau wave crashed in. The anti-Harper movement happened. She fell 17 points to 35%, but still managed to hold off with a perfect vote split between the Democrats, NDP, and the Liberals. They each had 30.
There's a lot at play there, and you just mentioned a whole bunch of dynamics. The NDP may not be as popular, certainly they're lower in the polls than they were then. Conservatives are higher in the polls. There won't be a Trudeau wave. That being said, Terry Lake is very well known and has served as mayor and as MLA and a cabinet minister in the Christy Clark government.
He doesn't lose elections in Kamloops.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. It'll be a race for sure. He'll make it competitive.
It's a big get for the Trudeau team. I mean, that's someone with a lot of credibility. Would be probably a BC cabinet minister from BC, you'd think. But at the same time, I think it's a tough road to hoe. But it'll be interesting to see. That's for sure. He's been working, by the way, for the last couple of years with a marijuana company.
Who hasn't?
It's funny, all these retired cabinet ministers get out of office and then they go join these marijuana startups, and you wonder, and then start advocating for change that they themselves did not bring in. But No offense,
You
Dr.
digress.
Lake. I digress, Dr. Lake. Okay. First phase of Highway 1 bidding, construction project east of Kamloops. See, we went from federal politics to Kamloops, now to east of Kamloops.
That's right.
Like, I'm segueing greatly. The first, basically, really the first agreement or bids have come back on the first project lead Burr agreement. So, give a bit of background, the NDP have signed a sweetheart deal with 19 building trades unions who happen to give them $2.5 million in campaign donations, saying you get a monopoly on all construction on the Patello Bridge and on Highway 1 and other mega projects to come. Anyone who wants to work on those projects will be forced to join your union and pay you union dues and pay you union benefits that, of course, they will never get to claim because they will leave the union shortly after it's done. It's a sweetheart deal. We're finally seeing the first projects come back in. Gasp, Chris. They're all coming back over budget.
Yeah, and the thing to remember about these, what the NDP have called community benefit agreements, let's put that in quotation marks, because this was one of the worst.
It benefits Tom Sigerson's community.
Well, it's one of the worst backroom deals to come out of Victoria in decades.
It's the kind of thing that people like Integrity BC would have been ripping their hair out over if the BC Liberals did friends and insiders and nonsense.
Yeah, it was all done behind closed doors. No consultation with industry. No white paper went out. No panel was struck. There was no question to say, hey, construction industry, how can you deliver projects more effectively, more efficiently for British Columbians? Instead, they signed a deal with the Building Trades Union, 19 of them, which represent, of the 250,000 men and women who got up today, went to a job site, the building trades represents 15% of that workforce. And they train 15% of that workforce. And so the stated goal of this policy is we're going to hire more women, we're going to train more people, we're going to provide more opportunities for young people, Indigenous people. But when you give a monopoly to 15% of the workforce, you aren't going to hire more women, you aren't going to train more people, you're not going to provide more opportunities for people. And so
in fact, the union's entire structure is built against that because it's not about bringing those new people in. It's about protecting the guys with the most seniority, making sure they get all the work.
That's right. So we said, we're challenging this in court, and we're joined by effectively everybody else other than the building trades. We're joined by the BC Construction Association, Vancouver Regional Construction Association, two unions, CLAC and Canada West Construction Union.
That
BC
didn't give the
Chamber of
NDP any money, so they didn't get the
That's right,
blessing.
they're frozen out because they're not the right union.
BC Chamber of Commerce, Canadian Federation of Independent Business, a number of construction companies.
So we're all lined up. And so what we've said is, listen, this is unfair because employees of construction companies, if they bid this project, will leave the employment of their construction company and have to become an employee of a new Crown corporation, leave all the benefits, leave the payroll, join a new Crown corporation, and have to join a union. The bureaucracy, the red tape, the confusion is unbelievable. So what we said is this will increase costs, there'll be fewer bidders, and taxpayers are going to pay more, workers are going to lose out, companies are going to lose out. So what happened in the first contracts were let, the first RFP went out for a section of road on the four-laning of Highway 1 from Kamloops to the Alberta border. Lo and behold, the budget was set in 2015 at $35 million. They didn't get 12 bids or 10 bids or 8 bids.
As they used to get
as
on
they
projects.
normally would. They got 4 bids. 4 bids. And of those 4 bids, the low bid was $51.5 million, which is 47% higher than the budget that was set in 2015. So when the NDP says taxpayers are not going to pay more, that's an outright lie. It's not true. When the NDP says, there's going to be opportunities for local hires. So here's the hiring profile according to the collective agreement, and it is. And before you get First Nations who live in the area, First Nations live outside the area, Union people live in the area, Union people live outside the area. You can hire, way down the list, local individuals, local construction workers. But if you hire them, the construction company has to let the union know, and the union will do what? They will provide clearance. Now, I don't know what that means, but I imagine if you don't join the union, you're not working on that project.
Well, you're definitely not. It would be illegal to work on that project if you don't join the union. So, but
it's unfair.
If you don't kiss the ring, you're definitely not going to work on that.
So it penalizes workers by forcing them to leave their existing employer and by forcing them to join a union. It removes opportunities for construction. If you started a construction company 20 years ago and you built it up to 50, 75, 100, 150 people, you're effectively, what they're effectively saying, you don't have the right to bid this work. Because if you do bid the work, you're going to lose your employees, to the Crown Corporation, and your workers are going to have to join one of those building trades unions.
Yep.
It's an outrageous policy. Taxpayers are going to pay more. Workers will lose out.
Less work.
Contractors lose out.
Less work will be done.
Yeah.
And they've cut out not insignificant companies. They've cut out companies that have won major Ministry of Transportation awards for their innovation, their safety records. Those companies are not bidding on these projects. In fact, they've joined our lawsuit because they're saying, hey, we can't operate under this. We can't guarantee worker safety when we're being forced to use, people who we're unfamiliar with, and our best staff can't be put on these projects. So
it is completely insane.
It is. It's 1970s, 1990s NDP dogma, and frankly, John Horgan should be ashamed of himself for going along with his friends and insiders and doing it. But there's not much shame these days in the BC NDP. All right, finally, let's talk a little U.S. politics. Chris, I know you love it. The Mueller Report dropped. Turns out, first of all, everyone's complaining about the redactions in the Mueller Report. Let me tell you, the redactions in the Mueller Report are nothing compared to the redactions we get in FOIs from the BC NDP government. I wish I only got that many redactions. Our FOI system is clearly broken. So that is not great. But the Mueller Report came out. No. I gotta say, no one is better than Trump at the little sound bites. The collusion delusion being my favorite.
Yes, there's no collusion.
Yeah.
So on that, listen, on that first point on whether there was a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russians.
They're too dumb to be conspiring, I guess.
So Mueller said no.
Yeah.
Were there opportunities where certain individuals were open to receiving information from Russians? Yes, but it didn't rise to a level of a charge. On the second issue, obstruction of justice, he said, well, what Mueller effectively said is nothing rises to the level of being able to charge, but he could not, to use his term, exonerate the president. I think what the report does reveal is there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on that would hard to believe that this would have happened in any other White House. There is a confluence of personalities and in some cases characters that have surrounded President
and lack
Trump
of expertise.
That is shocking on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
But I think the reality is this. Unfortunately, this is consumed so much. You cannot turn on a cable TV channel in the United States where it's not 24/7 Mueller, Trump, Mueller, and a whole bunch of other things. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it is costing the United States opportunities to
their
move
sanity.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's nothing like it in Canada.
Oh, I don't know. I found it a little interesting that Trump thought the Justice Department should act as his personal lawyers and do what he says. I found a little bit of a parallel there to one Justin Trudeau and how the laugh scam has unfolded.
Well, the one thing about the U.S. is that the FBI is an entity that it serves in a unique way that we don't really have an equivalent in Canada. The RCMP is different. The RCMP does local policing and it does national. It deals with national issues. But the FBI is singularly focused on a whole bunch of issues and has the resources and the mandate to go after white-collar crime. And they have a grand jury process where the prosecutors will impanel a grand jury, present evidence, and all of a sudden there's a charge. Yeah. And a lot of times these investigations go on, and obviously nobody knows that they're taking place. We don't have the same kind of tool in Canada, and unfortunately, on many levels, Canada does have a reputation as being a haven for white-collar crime. And that's unfortunate. But when you see the SNC-Lavalin issue, we don't have the same ability to investigate to the extent that you could in the United States. And so oftentimes these issues, which do deserve to be further investigated and more facts need to come to light, often that doesn't happen in this country.
Yeah. Do you think the special prosecutor system in the States is broken? Whereas, if you can't find evidence of the crime, you always end up finding evidence of process issues.
Well, I think what you have in a special prosecutor, we do have special prosecutors here that are often that have been appointed.
They're so quiet, right?
Well, what happens if you appoint an individual as a special prosecutor and give them a budget and investigative powers and resources? Well, ultimately, They don't want to come back a year or 2 years later and say, hey, didn't find anything.
Yes.
Nothing was to be found.
Nothing. Sorry about that $3 million I spent on.
Yeah. So there is an awful lot of pressure to come back with something. Didn't find this, but hey, I found that. So that's a natural process of appointing investigators, giving them budgets and the term of reference. I would say that I think in many cases you do need to have someone who's not connected to the political entity that may be being investigated, whether it's an individual, a party, or someone else. You need someone who's independent. But there are some consequences to doing that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Interesting stuff. Any thoughts? The latest polls have your guy, Pete Buttigieg. He's climbing it up. He's now at 15%, right behind Bernie and Biden, and like tripling or quadrupling Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker.
Yeah, no, listen, he's a very interesting guy. I mean, he's...
They're digging out the Oppo now, though. They're all working.
Oh, they will, yeah, and that's
the investigators in South Bend. It must be like a boom for their hotels.
Yeah, and Joe Biden apparently this week.
He's going to announce and then do a fundraiser that night and then take the weekend off. So interesting.
Well,
interesting job, Uncle Joe.
They're going to have nearly 20 candidates in the race. How do you do debate?
I have no idea.
The top 10?
I mean, even if you do the split debate where you have a threshold, I mean, right now, there's 8 or 9 of them who are at 5% or better. Like, are you going to go to 10%? Well, then there's only 3, and you're really...
Yeah. It's going to be interesting.
It is. It's going to be something. It's a race unlike any we've ever seen as far as the kind of broad base. I mean, like the Republican race last time, there was a bunch of them, but not this many, and not people who in normal election times would be considered major contenders. You never even hear about Cory Booker anymore.
Well, you don't hear Jay Inslee, who's a governor from Washington State. Like you don't hear about him.
Yeah, Inslee. Yeah.
So. It's a fascinating process. It is interesting how politics is so all-consuming in the U.S. and the billions of dollars that are allocated to winning a presidential race. And then if you think of the cycle that you go through with senators and governors and statewide elections and local elections, it is unbelievable.
Yeah, if you're a campaign professional there, you never work for lobbying firms. You just go from campaign to campaign to campaign to campaign. Here in Canada, because we don't have that many elections and because the money isn't the same, you go in between, you go and consult for various lobby groups, and that's what causes a lot of the consternation about, so-and-so's working lobbied for, the pharmaceutical giants, and now he's working on such and such a campaign. It is a completely different kettle of fish in the States.
Yeah, and we don't have the same amount of resources applied to campaigns here, so you have there isn't really a campaign organizing profession, if you will. It's very hard to...
Yeah, a guy like Stephen Carter in Alberta, for example, who made a name for himself organizing campaigns. What's he doing now? He works.
It's hard, right?
Yeah, it is. So, or Warren Kinsella is another great, on the Chrétien War Room years, but since has become a bit of a pundit more than anything else because there's not really a market for that. So, interesting times. Thank God we're not American. Is that what we want to say?
Well, that's right. We've got a simpler system here.
Kinder, gentler.
That's right.
That's what we have. All right. That's it for the ICBA cast this week. You can catch us next Monday. You're in town Monday, right? 29th?
Yes.
Excellent. We will
be great.
Back Monday morning for a little bit more Monday morning quarterbacking. But also next week, the BC legislature is back in session. So we can talk about the hell they are about to unfurl upon the business community when it comes to WorkSafe BC and other red tape.
changes, WorkSafe BC, employment standards. There is a host of
You think it's bad now, people, they're about to choke you out completely. So here we go. We'll be ready next week. Thanks for watching.
Have a good day.